Just a moment ago, all of the fans longed to learn more about the mountain at last. Men have been exposed and shattered down by the manufacturers. For many years, after seeing the program, there have been allegations about staged drama, strategically placed obstacles, and even the easiest animal assaults that we've all accepted it, as have the supporters being aware that it was a component of the show's amusement value. But what if there's more to the narrative? What if the show's reputation for falsifying danger isn't as clear-cut as you think that might believe? This is a tale that you won't wish to miss. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe, like, and if you would, press the notification button. Enjoy more videos similar to this one. Now, We All the Mountain Men show is a reality show, and like most reality shows, it involves a lot of editing. Many conjectures have been made regarding the degree of coordination behind Mountain Men's drama, and even a few members of the cast have acknowledged it. Consider Tom, our man. The yak's myth and mythology. He was stated during an interview that the creation of Mountain Men always is to make the show appear more perilous. The producers will make cuts based on his haphazard bear photos to create a straightforward stroll through the forest appears to be a life or death crisis. This could appear as, not surprisingly, many devoted fans of the Men of the Mountains. Numerous viewers have already more about the manufacturing process that show can occasionally be, and even according to Distractify, even when accuracy was true, the crew was still forced to reboot the footage simply to make it more dramatic for amusement. For many years, the producer's narrative is that it's every television and every item on the show is genuine. However, an internal leak I beg to differ. Memo. In light of this bit of knowledge, there aren't any references to any organized bear battles or situations. But it does make reference to specific terms, such as class incident of confinement, suppression of compromising video, as well as anchor extraction that is both urgent and required. Regarding this entire matter, it is quite evident that the television program can have a few heightened scenes, but it also includes moments that are quite authentic. One unique tale that the makers and the crew members themselves have attested to, including a specific crew member, a cameraman, or more precisely, affable mountain man. In an unexpected turn of events, a terrifying revelation shut off the entire system deep in the woods. Manufacturing. Few individuals talk about the sudden closure of the Mountain Men's output, but according to what is being shown now, it is evident that a whole the timeline must be made public. As stated according to producers, this occurrence took place in Alaska's Revelation Mountains. Expert reports state that this is one somewhere that is far more hectic than any other place where no mountain man has ever shot a movie. It surpasses the Blue Ridge Mountains and even a yak by a wide margin. This location is 175 miles away outside of Fairbanks, and it's among them locations that have been characterized as experiencing a soul-crushing windstorm degree of seclusion. It was located at the Mountains of Revelation that a veteran crew, comprising individuals such as Mason Gertz and Brad Weiss, was dispatched. 5 men were involved. Camera crew, and not a single man in the crew was inexperienced. Actually, according to these were men who were familiar with producers' ways to prevent freezing batteries. They were also adept at carrying 50 pounds cams on elk hunts up to 10,000 feet. The cherry on top was that they also understood how to continue with their work, even if there is no power for days. These men weren't in the deep mountains by themselves. They were genuinely adhering to one of the most difficult men they were acquainted with, the renowned Marty Mayoruto. The crew was present to record. Marty was checking his trap line. It was just another ordinary day spent filming with normative practices and normative TV shows about mountain men. However, this time it worked out somewhat in a different way. Additionally, producers claim and the crew, the subsequent events were something other than the norm. As the narrative progresses goes, everything was going very smoothly till a sound was heard. It was more or less noise from the periphery of that tree. While the crew kept shooting, one cameraman, Marty, continued to watch the tree. It was the same as Mason Gertz. He noticed something and chose to carry out his duties, taking a shot off it. Based on his own description of occurrence, he caught a glimpse of fur, or as it proved to be a lynx. As Amazon Gertz was a professional who was more than ready to perform his duties, and he did. However, there was only one issue: that the animal wasn't really hunting or stalking. In fact, it was moving far too quickly, almost as if it were fleeing from a situation. But that didn't deter Gertz. He simply had to take that shot. Thus, he departed from the others with his 50-pound camera setup that is precisely balanced on over his shoulder. His boots were buried deep in the snow, and yet he continued. Marty, while the other crew members attempted to call the wind, was simply too loud for him to return for any sounds to reach him. Thus, Gertz continued to move, and had his lens prepared to capture the image of the feline. He shifted from one location to another, from behind the trees onto the bank of the river that is frozen. The ice at the time seemed rather substantial, and it took up enormous area of space. The lens hadn't spent any time, therefore it was already in the middle. Gertz took his very first action on the ice. The remaining crew, all of this was now being filmed by members, and they saw as Gertz made an effort to make connections. It's amusing how they have caught everything, despite the fact that they didn't know what was going to happen next. There was a sound in a nanosecond that was nearly like a jagged fracture that rocked everyone right down to the core. Gertz was aware of that intended, so he came to a complete halt and glanced down before turning back to Marty, who was making a warning motion with his arms sign. But Gertz ignored this as shifted his focus back to the lynx, frantically attempting to obtain the shot. After taking one more stride, everything collapsed. He had entered in a single glance. He had jumped through Alaskan river ice. As you were able to imagine that everyone was experiencing startle. It wasn't simply freezing outside. It was 30 degrees below zero. It was quite cold. The Arctic waters are frigid. Conditions could only be characterized as excruciating. Mason had been carried away by the river. Gertz. Just the cold paralyzed his muscles, as well as his 50-pound. He was being pulled down by the camera gear. He was practically drowning at this point in the ice. It wasn't a pleasant sight, to the very least. What was the crew? Marty and the remainder of it were all making every effort to remove him from there. They were right on the brink of the hole, their hands extended, and they made every effort to seize his rucksack and his jacket. They took care of everything in their capacity until they could pull him out. In a brief instant following the conflict, Gertz was now above the gasping in the water and on the ice, and shivering the entire time. He was drenched wet, and to exacerbate the situation, he was passing away. However, despite all, his camera was still on, and he continued to be committed to hold on to it forever. He was there resting on his back with his lens still indicated the river's extreme terminus of Trian. At that time, everyone observed it from the additional cameras to the Marty and the remainder of the 5-man crew himself. Everybody froze. Not due to the lynx had vanished, but there was something else, something that appeared in the woods. They looked lovely, sure it wasn't a wolf or a bear. They were aware of its height and was observing them. For a brief moment, nobody moved at all. The sole noises, the sounds they could hear, now came from the Mason Gertz, who was wheezing, and the wind for the air. Following Marty's directives, they must get out of there. They were discussing a mile away from the cabin. Additionally, even though it appeared as if it were only 1 mile, it was far more intricate than that since it seemed to be 1,000 miles away. Gertz was unable to feel his leg, and his clothing that was drenched in the Arctic water were already solidly frozen. The jacket was already becoming more robust. His pants were almost ice, and he was wearing armor. Thus, the squad as a whole got him up to his feet, and they helped him while they ran. This experience was one for the books. Call it an entire mile loaded with your worst nightmares. This is the part of the footage that was concealed. It wasn't merely a peaceful medical evacuation, that it was a scared and frantic one. Two of the crew members were essentially carrying Gertz while making every effort to drag him through the snow. Marty was taking the lead throughout the whole charge. He possessed a slung over his shoulder. The gun was always paying attention and attempting to look behind him, to the left and to the right. Next, the filming with the other two crew members. As they say, the show must go on. Thus, they continued to perform their duties even when things had already taken a turn for the worse. Fortunately, their lenses caught everything from the fall to the running and the stumbling. Its 7 managed to record everyone's shocked-out face when the worst occurred. But they had not yet left the woods since, in the middle of everything, whatsoever was still pursuing them, as they had observed that it appeared to be lurking up behind trees, maintaining a secure distance, while continuing to travel with the crew. Gertz, meanwhile, was experiencing the worst all of the time. He was hurting, and the air was crystallizing at 30 degrees below zero. The water in his clothing, which was no on his body. He was the worst, cold. The one item was a part of it all. That incident nearly cost him everything he owned at hands. But he was still clinging here to the camera and holding onto it not at all. His gloves were almost drenched, and his skin was beginning to adhere to the metal that was frozen. At that time, the worst occurred. That was the time frostbite started to appear. He explained in a rare interview, claiming that he almost lost a portion of his hand due to frostbite. He was claimed to be able to sense the flesh's death. And he was able to feel everything at first, but then all of a sudden, he was emotionless. That it appeared as if his fingers were ashy and white and numb. He was horrified that he was going to lose them. At last, the team, they were still icy when they got to the cabin. Icy and terrified. They dropped right away. When the door slammed shut, I fell into the flood because of the wind. Marty didn't take long till he went directly to the wood stove, and despite his unsteadiness, he threw in gasoline. Hands. Next, the remainder of the crew crowded around Gertz, severing the clothing that was frozen off his body. They placing his hands in warm water and felt the discomfort as his nerves returned to life. Fortunately, he was still alive. He had unharmed fingers, and they were all safe and alive. At that moment, the radio came on. It served as the base of manufacturing in Missoula, is inquiring about their status because they had observed the signal and they had our beacon for location. The senior crew member who functioned as the field producer answered the microphone. He was stated that there was an emergency and referred to it as a code 3, meaning that in the water, they had a cameraman who had a low body temperature. Additionally, he warned the bassist that they weren't by themselves. The production responded right away. As they suggested, there was no hesitation. They should lock the door and remain inside. Strict warnings to leave were given to them at the cabin no matter what the conditions were. Additionally, they were asked refusing to film, and they were told that extraction was en route and that they were putting an end to everything. Thesis: the moment. The discovery that brought the show to a stop. This was exactly what producers refused to release the footage of. At the conclusion of everything went smoothly that day. After the crew was removed, Gertz was transported by air to a hospital. The alternative Marty was one of 4 crew members who were flown directly to the Warm Springs Productions headquarters in Missoula after they were all split up, debriefed. Additionally, they were made aware of their non-disclosure agreement signed, and in line with the memo that was disclosed, it is said that they were requested to sign fresh ones. The video recorded by the 4 cameras was considered unresolved and kept in a vault. It was nearly as if the event had never took place, but things weren't as simple as they appeared. This wasn't an issue they could resolve in known tidy bundle and conceal it. They still needed to construct a television program. And one of their cameramen was hurt. That was probably going to have inquiries. Thus, they done what they were best at. They produced a brand new, exaggerated tale. But it wasn't really adding up, And people were becoming aware of that to do internet research and delve into outdated forums and articles. You'll probably locate two very distinct accounts that of Mason Gertz's fate, demonstrating a notable discrepancy that validates people's anxieties. The initial narrative, which is the official version, was distributed to numerous media outlets and claims that a rescue team stopped any illnesses from developing. When you give it some thought, that doesn't make sense since a fully furnished medical rescue crew isn't suitable for formula. Within the mountains of Revelation, which are located 175 kilometers away from Fairbanks, is somewhat distant, and the only entranceway out is by Marty's small aircraft, a helicopter could not possibly be cast at sufficient since how long would it take to travel 175 kilometers, locate a little cottage and make a rescue in a blizzard. Of course, this would have required a lot of time, and by the when they would have reached the crew, Gertz would have either passed away long ago or he would have even lost his hands. The rescue scenario simply didn't make sense, and it was the heightened embodiment of what had truly took place. If you truly believe about it, the story was unfeasible with an inconsistent chronology of events. The entire narrative was simply that kind of story, when you require an official clean report. Additionally, it is the what kind of narrative do you mean when you're attempting to conceal something. Conversely, the second narrative is the genuine. That's what really occurred.